Some of you know, my wife and I, outside of what we do here at SCC, we both have jobs at the Monterey Bay Aquarium. But our job schedules certainly don't always line up. Hers is very straight and regular. It's Monday through Friday, like 8:30 to 5, and she's very set. Rarely she'll get called in on a weekend, but usually it's very set. Mine, on the other hand, is all over the place because I work in security and catering, and as you know, neither of those are very set hours. So one thing she'll do to pass the time at home, if she's home and I'm not, is she'll watch movies. And she's just kind of literally going through every movie we have at the moment. And so the other day when I came home, she was watching Disney's Aladdin. And I don't know if it's been a while since you've seen that, but I forgot some of the songs and the lyrics. But, as soon as you hear it, it all comes back. And then suddenly I'm a kid in junior high again when it came out. Some of you are like, you were in junior high? Yes, I was. For some of you, that's old. For some of you, that's young. But it brought it all back. And I'm like, I still remember the lyrics of this song. I still remember the politically incorrect verse they changed. Some of you don't even know about that one. That was in the original movie. And so anyways, I'm listening to it and it gets to the genie part. There's always that question in the back of your mind that pops up and goes, as silly as it is, if I ever found a lamp, I wonder what I'd wish for. If this cool genie showed up and said, you got 3, uno, dos, tres, remember that part? You get 3 wishes. Which ones, what do you want to do with your wishes? There's only a few rules, those kinds of things. What would you wish for? And I bring that up because while we know God is certainly not just some cosmic genie that does whatever we say, there was this one time in 1 Kings chapter 3 where he gave a king one wish, anything this king wanted. Where we'll pick up the story here, it's somewhere around just after King David's reign, somewhere around 970 BC. And the second king ever of Israel, whose name was David, who was a great king overall, has just died. And his son Solomon has taken over being king. And he started ruling, and as verse 1 of chapter 3 says, look at that there. So it says, Solomon, among the things he was doing, made an alliance with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and married his daughter. He brought her to the city of David until he had finished building his palace and the temple of the Lord and the wall around Jerusalem. The people, however, were still sacrificing at the high places because a temple had not yet been built for the name of the Lord. Solomon showed his love for the Lord by walking according to the instructions given to him by his father David, except that he offered sacrifices and burned incense on the high places. Okay, you might be going, okay, whoever wrote this is kind of obsessed with these high places. What is that about? Well, basically the high places that he's talking about were these local open-air shrines that were left over from these different groups that Israel had taken over to take over their land. These groups like the Canaanites and these pagan cultures, they had used these high places to worship their idols and burn babies and all these horrible practices. But when the Israelites took over, they said, well, let's just turn these into places to worship God, the real God. And so that's what they had been doing, which wasn't necessarily a terrible idea. But the problem was, especially later once the temple was completed, these high places became kind of a thorn in their side and threatened the purity of Israel's worship and their faith. Because the high places put them out there among these other cultures who would come up and go, here's how we worship stuff. Well, here's what we do. And they started looking around and going, oh, that's kind of cool. And so they didn't worship God like he directed them to as time went on. And they start to follow these other cultures that would burn babies alive to idols and worship the stars and all this weird stuff. And eventually that gets them into trouble many years later, and they get a major timeout from God. And so the author, who's writing way later, is looking back as he's recording this history book for Israel, and he's going, he's kind of inserting his own opinion. He's like, this was where it started, and it's really not good that King Solomon tolerated this. And so you'll see these little comments in Kings where he's like, the high places were bad, but they're not doing anything yet. He goes, yeah, but looking back from where I am now, I see how terrible of an idea this was. You ever have those moments in life where, you think life is going great, you're making the right decisions, and years later you stop and look back and you're like, man, I was stupid. What a dumb teenager I was, or whatever. Amy and I were reading this book a few months ago, and it was talking about how you manage your finances as a couple or something. And we get done reading, and she looks at me, she goes, we were just really dumb when we were first married. I'm like, yes, we were. I'm glad we're slightly smarter now. You make dumb decisions that you regret later. So that's what this guy is saying. This is how it happened, watched out. But even Solomon at this point is sacrificing there. Verse 4, so the king went to Gibeon to offer sacrifices, for that was the most important high place. And Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. And at this point, at least, verse 5, at Gibeon, the Lord did appear to Solomon during the night in a dream. And God said, ask for whatever you want me to give you. Man, Imagine if God said that to you. Whatever you want, ask. Now notice God didn't say he'd give it to him, but he did say you can ask. Ask for whatever you want me to give you. Imagine if God appeared to you and asked you that. First of all, I wonder if we'd actually be in such awe of God appearing that we'd be speechless in the first place, right? Because every time someone sees him in the Bible, they just fall down and freak out, and God's like, it's okay. But that's the first thing. But even if we could actually get some words out and think straight enough, again, how would you respond if God actually gave you one wish? Next part tells us what Solomon does. Check it out, verse 6. Solomon answered, you've shown great kindness to your servant, my father David, because he was faithful to you and righteous and upright in heart. You've continued this great kindness to him and have given him a son to sit on his throne this very day. Now, Lord, my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David, but I'm only a little child. I don't even know how to carry out my duties. Now, little child is an exaggeration there in Hebrew, by the way. What he's saying is I'm inexperienced. He wasn't literally a little child at this point, but he's just saying, I'm inexperienced. I don't know what I'm doing, right? Verse 8, he says, your servant is here among the people you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to count or number. Look at this. So here's his request, verse 9. So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. For who is able to govern this great people of yours? Wow. So out of everything Solomon could have asked for, longer life, money, hot girlfriend, whatever, out of everything he could have asked for, he says, my very humble request is I don't know what I'm doing. God, help me know right from wrong. Help me know how to lead people. Give me wisdom, basically. His request is for wisdom. Isn't that awesome? So that, not so he could be so great for himself, so he could be the best king possible for God. I mean, humility at its best. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not in denial. I want to do my best for you, so help me with wisdom so I can do my best for you. Isn't that awesome? God thought it was. Look at verse 10. He says, the Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for this. Look at this. So God said to him, since you have asked for this, and not for long life or wealth for yourself, nor have you asked for the death of your enemies, but you asked for discernment in administering justice, I'll do what you have asked. I'll give you a wise and discerning heart, so there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be. And moreover, I'll give you what you have not asked for, since your heart was in the right place, both wealth and honor, so that in your lifetime you'll have no equal among kings. And if you walk in obedience to me, and you keep my decrees and commands, as your father David did, I'll give you a long life too. Then Solomon awoke and realized it had been a dream. He returned to Jerusalem, stood before the ark of the Lord's covenant, and sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings, basically, thank you, God. And then he gave a feast for all his court. Isn't that cool? God's like, ask me for whatever you want. It's like, well, I'm going to humbly ask for wisdom to be my best for you. God's like, that is such an awesome request. I'm going to give you that. And everything you didn't ask for. Boom. How cool is that? Then we get just a taste of what it looks like when God answers a prayer for wisdom next here. Watch this. Verse 16. Now 2 prostitutes came to the king and stood before him. One of them said, pardon me, my lord. This woman and I live in the same house, and I had a baby while she was there with me. The 3rd day after my child was born, this woman also had a baby. We were alone. There was no one in the house but the 2 of us. During the night, this woman's son died because she laid on him. So she got up in the middle of the night, took my son from my side while your servant was asleep. She put him by her breast and put her dead son by my breast. The next morning, I got up to nurse my son, and he was dead. But when I looked at him closely in the morning light, I saw it wasn't the son I had born. The other woman said, no, the living one is my son, the dead one is yours. But the first insisted, no, the dead one is yours, the living one is mine. And so they argued before the king. The king said, this one says my son is alive and your son is dead, while that one says, no, your son is dead and mine is alive. Then the king said, bring me a sword. So they brought a sword for the king. He then gave an order, cut the living child in 2 and give half to one and half to the other. The woman whose son was alive and was deeply moved out of love for her son said to the king, please, my lord, give her the baby. Don't kill him. But the other said, neither you nor I shall have him. Cut him in 2. Then the king was like, time out, gave this ruling, give the living baby to the first woman. Don't kill him. She's the mom. When all Israel heard the verdict the king had given, they held the king in awe because they saw he had wisdom from God to administer justice. Man, wouldn't it be great to have wisdom like that for daily decisions? Which homework assignment do I do first? Which comedy, show should I do? Where should I live? What job should I take? Oh my gosh, the questions we face every day. Wouldn't it be nice to have wisdom from God? And the Bible actually has a lot to say about the importance of seeking wisdom for your marriage, for your job, for your kids, for everything, right? In fact, just a few years after what we just read, Solomon writes a book. It's in the middle of your Bibles right now called Proverbs. And he shares a bunch of wisdom. And he's like, here's how to live a wise life. And he actually spends the first 9 chapters just trying to convince you to read the rest, basically, saying, do you understand how important it is to live with wisdom, to make that a priority? He says wisdom can help you with everything from making good decisions, obviously, to building great relationships, including with your spouse and your kids. He says wisdom can help you with managing your finances well. One of my favorite verses, he says wisdom can help you get a good night's sleep because you're not staying up worrying all the time. He says when you get wisdom, it'll even help you understand and know God better and help you process the things he does in your life instead of just running from it all the time, just understanding, okay, God's doing something, he's disciplining me maybe. I need to go through this. Helps you understand him. And all of that, of course, can lead in turn to victories and blessings and protection only God can give you. And in fact, turn over to Proverbs 8 for a second with me. It's right in the middle of your Bibles. If you find Psalms, go to the right just a few pages. If you hit Isaiah, go left. But basically, if you let your Bible fall open right to the middle, you should be somewhere in the neighborhood of Proverbs. And I love how he puts it in just one little part of this big, long 9-chapter sermon he gives about how important wisdom is. But in chapter 8, he gets all poetic. And he basically imagines, what if wisdom wasn't like a thing? What if it was a person? He personifies wisdom. If you're like a Myers-Briggs sensor type person, this might go over your head. If you're intuitive, you're going to like, oh, I love this. But he gets all symbolic and poetic and personifies wisdom and says, if wisdom was a person, what would that person say to you? That's the gist of it here. So Proverbs chapter 8, starting in verse 1. Check this out. He says, does not wisdom call out? Does not understanding raise her voice? At the highest point along the way where the paths meet, she takes her stand. Beside the gate leading into the city, at the entrance, she cries aloud, to you, O people, I call out. I raise my voice to all mankind. You who are simple, gain prudence. You who are foolish, set your hearts on it. Listen, for I have trustworthy things to say. I open my lips to speak what is right. My mouth speaks what is true, for my lips detest wickedness. All the words of my mouth are just. None of them is crooked or perverse. To the discerning, all of them are right. They're upright to those who have found knowledge. Choose my instruction instead of silver, knowledge rather than choice gold. For wisdom is more precious than rubies, and nothing you desire can compare with her. I, wisdom, dwell together with prudence. I possess knowledge and discretion. To fear the Lord is to hate evil. I hate pride and arrogance, evil behavior and perverse speech. Counsel and sound judgment are mine. I have insight. I have power. By me kings reign, and rulers issue decrees that are just. By me princes govern, and nobles, all who rule on the earth. I love those who love me, and those who seek me find me. With me are riches and honor, enduring wealth and prosperity. My fruit is better than fine gold. What I yield surpasses choice silver. I walk in the way of righteousness, along the paths of justice, bestowing a rich inheritance on those who love me, and making their treasuries full. The Lord brought me forth as the first of his works, before his deeds of old. I was formed long ages ago, at the very beginning when the world came to be. When there were no watery depths, I was given birth. When there were no springs overflowing with water, before the mountains were settled in place, before the hills, I was given birth. Before he made the world or its fields or any of the dust of the earth. I was there when he set the heavens in place, when he marked out the horizon, on the face of the deep, when he established the clouds above and fixed securely the foundations of the deep, when he gave the sea its boundary so the waters would not overstep his command, and when he marked off the foundations of the earth. Then was I constantly at his side. That's why science is so awesome, right? The more you study creation, the more wisdom you see God has. And Solomon's saying, dude, God didn't just haphazardly make stuff. Wisdom was in everything God created. Look at this, verse 30. Then I was constantly at his side. I was filled with delight day after day, rejoicing always in his presence, rejoicing in his whole world, delighting in mankind. Now then, my children, listen to me. Blessed are those who keep my ways. Listen to my instruction and be wise. Do not disregard it. Blessed are those who listen to me, watching daily at my doors, waiting at my doorway. For those who find me find life and receive favor from the Lord. But those who fail to find me harm themselves. All who hate me love death. Again, he's being poetic, but just a taste of the benefits of wisdom. And that's just one chapter of 9. He's like, do you get the idea? As he says in chapter 4, his point, get wisdom. Even though it costs you all you have, get understanding, he says in chapter 4. Which certainly is something that can grow in us as we seek it and pursue it. You do things like read the book of Proverbs. There's some funny ones in there, by the way, too. There's this one, he says, a quarrelsome wife is like a constant dripping. I guess he had a bad day in his marriage that day. I don't know. He has other ones like, some people are so lazy, they put their hand, like you get like a chip to get some dip. He's like, they put their hand in the bowl, and they're too lazy to even bring it back to their mouth. He's like, don't be like that. There's some hilarious Proverbs. Read it sometime. If you're reading through the Bible with us, we'll get there eventually. But he's like, man, get wisdom, get into this, understand, learn to think wisely, and pursue this stuff. And there is a long way you can go by doing that on your own. But the best thing is to do what he did and ask God for wisdom. And I'm so happy to say that the New Testament tells us you can do the same thing Solomon did, in the book of James. In fact, turn over there. Let's look at one more passage here before we close up. James chapter 1, way in the back. If you want the easy way to find it, go to Revelation, just the last book of the Bible, Revelation, and go left about 7 books, 7 little books. It goes Revelation, Jude, 3 John, 2 John, 1 John, 2 Peter, 1 Peter, James. So Revelation, Jude, some Johns, some Peters, and James. Or use the index, that works too. But James chapter 1. James, if you don't know, was one of the leaders of the early church back at the very, very beginning. He was actually also Jesus' half-brother, which was pretty cool. But back at the very beginning of the church in the first century. And his book here is actually a letter that he wrote to a bunch of Christians throughout the Roman Empire, basically to say, okay, this Jesus stuff is new. Here's what an authentic faith looks like. And he goes through all these specific things. Faith without deeds is dead. Don't just say you believe. If you believe stuff, do something with it. It's just a fantastic book. And one of my favorites in the whole Bible. But as part of all that, right here, starting in verse 2, he says this. He says, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds. Because the testing of your faith produces perseverance. When you're a Christian, suffering is never meaningless, right? So count it joy. It helps you grow. Let perseverance finish its work, so you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. But look at this. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Such a person is double-minded and unstable in all they do. So James says, if any of you lacks wisdom, do what Solomon did. Ask God, right? Who, he says, gives generously, right? Circle, underline, highlight, memorize that word, permanent ink. Gives generously, not stingy, like, all right, I'll help you make that decision. God's like, no, I'm just waiting to give it to you. In fact, next, right? Who gives generously and it might be given to you. Is that what it says? No, it will be given to you. James goes, Christian, do you understand? The same God who gave Solomon wisdom is just waiting for you to ask him so he can give you wisdom for those decisions. Whether you're facing a trial or a temptation, if you're going through a rough time in life and you're not sure what to do about it, ask God for wisdom. Ask him to help you stand the test. Ask him to help you understand his divine plan. If you just have no clue, just say, okay, God, regardless of why this is happening, how do you want me to respond to what's happening? What is your will for me in this whole thing? Ask him. Because James says he's just waiting to help you like that. He's just waiting without reservation or hesitation or criticism. I love that part. James goes, he does it without finding fault. He doesn't say, well, I'll give you wisdom because obviously you're too dumb to figure it out. No. Without finding fault. Completely loving, completely without reservation, without grumbling. He's waiting with total sincerity to help you make wise decisions. He wants you to have his wisdom so you can continue in this process of becoming like Jesus. New Testament says once you accept Christ, once you put your faith in him, God starts this process of shaping your character more every day to be like Jesus' character, to be loving like him and forgiving like him and bold like him and all those things. And wisdom is a huge part of that because Jesus was the ultimately wise person, right? He's God, so can't beat him. So James says, ask him. But verse 6, and here's a key. Don't miss this. Verse 6, when you ask, you got to believe and not doubt, because a person who doubts is like a wave of the sea blown and tossed by the wind. I mean, we live right here. You see the ocean on a windy day. It's crazy. I don't understand why whale watching people go out ever, because I get kind of sick on boats. But why they go out on those days? You know, I'm at the aquarium watching the boat go by on a nice smooth day. It's like, brrr. I'm like, maybe I'll go. The next day it's like choppy. It's like, brrr. I'm like, no, I'm good. I'll stay here. I can see whales from the deck. Okay, you know, deck gets a great view. But blown and tossed by the wind. Don't be like, he says, as someone who doubts, that person shouldn't think they'll receive anything from the Lord. Such a person is double-minded and unstable in all they do. In other words, when God has promised to do something for you, don't be doubting his promise. You know, now I know there's sometimes where you're like, I don't know what God's going to do with this. Okay, I get that. But when it's something he promised, doubting that is doubting him. And why would God help you doubt him? You know, you've got to trust him when you ask and know he will help you if you ask him to. James is saying, don't be someone who lives with this inner conflict between, well, I know God can, but I don't know if he will. Sometimes that might be the case, but when it's something he's clearly promised to do, that can go out the window, right? Don't be someone with a character and a conduct that are unstable or even hypocritical. No wishy-washy faith. God, please give me wisdom. Is he going to do it? I don't know. James says that is the wrong mindset, okay? This one, you can know he will because he promised to. Don't doubt his promises. As he says, doubting God is like actually showing a disloyalty to God. You know, you parents out there, if you tell your kids, I promise we're going to Disneyland next week, and you mean it, and then they show, are we really going to Disneyland? Are you sure? Are we really? And how many times them asking would it take before you're like, all right, fine, we won't go. You don't believe me. You know, God's like, if you don't trust me, well, I want a relationship with you here. Come on. Don't be disloyal. God's not going to help you lead a disloyal life because that actually leads to instability, James says, right? In every area of life. Look at that. In all he does, instability comes from doubt. Isn't that interesting? God really drove that truth home for Amy and me a month or two ago. We were going through some crazy stuff. It seemed like everything around us was going crazy in some different ways and facing some discouraging situations and stuff. And each of us ended up kind of having these moments where we'd be like, feel like we were kind of going crazy. Like our brains were going two directions. Like, I think God can do this, but what if he doesn't? Well, if he can, yeah, but this is happening. And it felt like we were double-minded, right? And we found ourselves saying, well, I know God can, but I don't know if he will. Until we realized, oh my gosh, the reason we got there, the reason we got to this place where you actually kind of feel like you're going crazy is because we started doubting God. And we're reading James, and this hits us like, you know, here's exactly where that comes from. You have those moments where you feel like you're going crazy. It's because you're doubting God. You're not trusting him to keep his promises. And we got that. The reason, what we needed was really simple. We'd stopped putting our faith in him and trusting him with that particular situation. We stopped really trusting him to come through for us on the issues we were dealing with. But as soon as we got back onto our faith, guess what happened? No more crazy, right? Well, maybe some of you think I'm still crazy, but it's a different kind, okay? You know, no more of that stressful, double-minded, unstable feeling. It disappeared because James is right. He goes, dude, trust God, and this will go away. It makes all the difference. When God has promised to do something, trust him to do it. So ask God for wisdom, then choose to trust him wholeheartedly that he'll actually give it to you because he said he would, right? You can trust him, you know. He's more than proven that throughout history. Read the Bible. Every time he makes a promise, guess what? He keeps it. God is the one person who will never flake on you in this life. We'll talk more about that next week. The cross, Easter, is the ultimate example of that. So come back for more on that next week. But God is faithful, trustworthy. People flake all the time, even the people who love you most, just because they're not perfect. But God is, and he will never break his promise. He's never broken one. He never will. So trust him, James says, that when he says he does love you unconditionally, without condition, he means it. He doesn't love you more on your good days and less on your bad days. He always loves you the same. And when he says, if you ask me for wisdom, I'll help you, trust him. He means it. He'll help you, right? So where could you use God's wisdom this week? What trial or temptation or decision are you facing for your family, for your job, for your future? What are you facing where you really need God's discernment on something? Why not take some time right now before we close up and ask him here? Because it's easy to, oh, great sermon, and then we walk out and then lunch happens and people cut us off, and what was that sermon again? You know, if I asked you guys what I taught on last Sunday, half of you'd be like, I don't know. Half of you'd forget we actually went to Dorothy's. I didn't teach. So anyway, you know, I do that too. What did I teach last week? I don't know. But man, let's take some time right now and just ask him. I'll play softly on my beat up old broken guitar here and try to make it not sound too horrible. And just take 60 seconds to get real with God, just to say whatever you need to say to him, just between you and him. If you're watching at home, you can do this too. And I'll close this up. So let's pray. Father, thank you so much for your promise to us to give us your wisdom. And I pray for just our church family as we take a minute now to ask for that in the places we need it. Go ahead and take just a minute to talk to him. Father, thank you for loving us and walking with us and the wisdom that you want to give us for this life. As Proverbs says, help us trust you with all our heart and not lean on our own understanding. We said a couple weeks ago, God, one of the worst things we can ever do is listen to our culture when it says to follow our hearts. You said 2,000-3,000 years ago in Jeremiah, that's an awful idea because our heart will deceive us above all else. Help us not lean on our own understanding, but trust you, God. Acknowledge you in all our ways and watch in awe as you make our paths straight. In Jesus' name we pray.